A Little Princess, Chapter 6, The Diamond Mines, Part 2. They were aware that Sarah was kind to the scullery maid, but they knew nothing of certain delightful moments snatched perilously when, the upstairs rooms being set in order with lightning rapidity, Sarah's sitting room was reached, and the heavy coal box set down with a sigh of joy. At such times, stories were told by installments. Things of a satisfying nature were either produced and eaten, or hastily tucked into pockets to be disposed of at night, when Becky went upstairs to her attic to bed. "But I has to eat 'em carefully, miss," she said once, "'cause if I leaves the crumbs the rats come out and gets 'em." "Rats!" exclaimed Sarah in horror. "Are there rats there?" "Lots of 'em, miss," Becky answered in quite a matter-of-fact manner. "They're mostly in rats and mice and attics. You gets used to the noise they make scuttling about. I got so I don't mind 'em as long as they don't run over my pillar." "Ugh!" said Sarah. "You gets used to anything after a bit," said Becky. "You have to, miss, if you're born a scullery maid. I'd rather have rats than cockroaches." "So would I," said Sarah. "I suppose you might make friends with a rat in time, but I don't believe should like to make friends with a cockroach." Sometimes Becky did not dare to spend more than a few minutes in the bright, warm room, and then this was the case perhaps only a few words could be exchanged, and a small purchase slipped into the old-fashioned pocket Becky carried under her dress skirt, tied around her waist with a band of tape. The search for and discovery of satisfying things to eat, which could be packed into small compass, added a new interest to Sarah's existence. When she drove or walked about, she used to look into shop windows eagerly. The first time it occurred to her to bring home 2 or 3 little meat pies. She felt that she had hit upon a discovery. When she exhibited them, Becky's eyes quite sparkled. "Oh, miss," she murmured, "them will be nice and fillin'. It's fillin'ness that's best. Sponge cake's an eveningly thing, but it melts away like, if you understand, miss, like'll these'll just stay in your stomach." "Well," hesitated Sarah, "I don't think it would be good if they stayed always, but I do believe they will be satisfying." They were satisfying, and so were beef sandwiches, bought at a cook shop, and so were rolled and bologna sausages. In time, Becky began to lose her hungry, tired look, and the coal box did not seem so unbearably heavy. However heavy it was, and whatsoever the temper of the cook and the hardness of the work heaped upon her shoulders, she had always had the chance of the afternoon to look forward to, the chance that Miss Sarah would be able to be in her sitting room. In fact, the mere seeing of Miss Sarah would have been enough without meat pies. If there was time only for a few words, they were always friendly, merry words that put heart into one. And if there was time for more, then there was an installment of a story to be told, or some other thing one remembered afterwards, and sometimes lay awake in one's bed in the attic to think over. Sarah, who was only doing what she was unconsciously liked better than anything else, nature having made her for a giver, had not the least idea what she meant to poor Becky, and how wonderful a benefactor she seemed. If nature has made you for a giver, your hands are born open, and so is your heart. And though there may be times when your hands are empty, your heart is always full, and you can give things out of that, warm things, kind things, sweet things, help and comfort and laughter, and sometimes gay, kind laughter is the best help of all. Becky had scarcely known what laughter was through all her poor little hard-driven life. Sarah made her laugh, and laughed with her, and though neither of them quite knew it, the laughter was as fillin' as the meat pies. A few weeks before Sarah's 11th birthday, a letter came to her from her father, which did not seem to be written in such boyish high spirits as usual. He was not very well, and was evidently overweighted by the business connected with the diamond mines. "You see, little Sarah," he wrote, "your daddy is not a businessman at all, and figures and documents bother him. He does not really understand them, and all this seems so enormous. Perhaps if I was not feverish, I should not be awake, tossing about one half of the night and spend the other half in troublesome dreams. If my little missus were here, I dare say she would give me some solemn good advice. You would, wouldn't you, little missus? One of his many jokes had been to call her his little missus because she had such an old-fashioned air. He had made wonderful preparations for her birthday. Among other things, a new doll had been ordered in Paris, and her wardrobe was to be indeed a marvel of splendid perfection. When she had replied to the letter asking her if the doll would be an acceptable present, Sarah had been very quaint. "I'm getting rather old," she wrote. "You see, I shall never live to have another doll given to me. This will be my last doll. There is something solemn about it. If I could write poetry, I'm sure a poem about it. A last doll would be very nice, but I cannot write poetry. I have tried, and it made me laugh. I did not sound like Watts or Coleridge or Shakespeare at all. No one could ever take Emily's place, but I should respect the last doll very much, and I am sure the school would love it. They all like dolls, though some of the big ones, the almost 15 ones, pretend they're too grown up." Captain Crewe had a splitting headache when he read this letter to his bungalow in his bungalow in India. The table before him was heaped with papers and letters which were alarming him and filling him with anxious dread. But he laughed as he had not laughed for weeks. "Oh," he said, "she's better fun every year she lives. God grant this business may right itself and leave me free to run home and see her. What wouldn't I give to have her little arms around my neck this minute? What wouldn't I give?" The birthday was to be celebrated by great festivities. The schoolroom was to be decorated, and there was to be a party. The boxes containing the presents were to be opened with great ceremony, and there was to be a glittering feast spread in Miss Minchin's sacred room. When the day arrived, the whole house was in a whirl of excitement. How the morning passed nobody quite knew, because there seemed such preparations to be made. The schoolroom was being decked with garlands and holly. The desks had been moved away. The red clovers had been put on the forms which they were arrayed around the room against the wall. When Sarah went in to her sitting room in the morning, she found on the table a small, dumpy package tied up in a piece of brown paper. She knew it was a present, and she thought she could guess who it came from. She opened it quite tenderly. It was a square pincushion made of not quite clean red flannel, and black pins had been stuck carefully into to form the words, "Many happy returns." "Oh," cried Sarah with a warm feeling in her heart, "what pains she has taken! I like it so. It makes me feel sorrowful." But the next moment she was mystified. On the underside of the pincushion was a secured card, bearing in neat letters the name, Miss Amelia Minchin. Sarah turned it over and over. "Miss Amelia?" she said to herself. "How can it be?" And just at that very moment she heard the door open cautiously and saw Becky peeping around. There was an affectionate, happy grin on her face, and she shuffled forward and stood nervously pulling at her fingers. "Do you like it, Miss Sarah?" she said. "Do you?" "Like it?" cried Sarah. "You darling Becky, you made it all yourself." Becky gave a hysteric but joyful sniff, and her eyes looked quite moist with delight. "It ain't nothing but flannel, and the flannel ain't new, but I wanted to give you something, and I made it of nights. I knew you could pretend it was satin with diamond pins in it. I tried to when I was making it." "The card, miss," rather doubtfully. "'Twarn't wrong of me to pick it up, or out of the dustbin, was it? Miss 'Melia had thrown it away, and I hadn't no card of my own, and I knowed it would be a proper precinct if I didn't have a pinned card on it, so I pinned Miss Amelia's." Sarah flew at her and hugged her. She could not have told herself anyone else why there was a lump in her throat. "Oh, Becky," she cried out with a queer little laugh. "I love you, Becky. I do. I do." "Oh, miss," breathed Becky. "It ain't good enough for that. The flannan wasn't new. Chapter 7 The Diamond Mines Again. When Sarah entered the holly-hung schoolroom in the afternoon, she did so as the head of a sort of procession. Miss Minchin, in her grandest silk dress, led her by the hand. A manservant followed, carrying the box containing the last doll. A housemaid carried a second box, and Becky brought up the rear, carrying a third and wearing a clean apron and a new cap. Sarah would have much preferred to enter the usual way, but Miss Minchin had sent for her, and after an interview in her private sitting room, had expressed her wishes. "This is not an ordinary occasion," she said. "I do not desire that it should be treated as one." So Sarah was led grandly into the inn and felt shy when, on her entry, the big girls stared at her and touched each other's elbows, and the little ones began to squirm joyously in their seats. "Silence, young ladies," said Miss Minchin, at the murmur which arose. "James, place the box at the table and remove the lid. Emma, put yours upon a chair. Becky," suddenly and severely. Becky had quite forgotten herself in the excitement and was grinning at Lottie, who was wriggling with rapturous expectation. She almost dropped her box, and disapproving voice so startled her, and her frightened, bobbing courtesy of apology was so funny that Lavinia and Jessie tittered. "It is not your place to look at young ladies," said Miss Minchin. "You forget yourself. Put your box down." Becky obeyed with alarmed haste, and hastily backed toward the door. "You may leave us," Miss Minchin announced to the servants with a wave of her hand. Becky stepped aside respectfully to allow the superior servants to pass out first. She could not help casting a longing glance at the box on the table. Something made of blue satin was peeping from between the folds of tissue paper. "If you please, Miss Minchin," said Sarah suddenly, "mayn't Becky stay?" It was a bold thing to do. Miss Minchin was betrayed into something like a slight jump. Then she put her eyeglasses up and gazed at her show pupil disturbedly. "Becky!" she exclaimed. "My dearest Sarah!" Sarah advanced a step toward her. "I want her because I know she will like to see the presents," she explained. "She's a little girl too, you know." Miss Minchin was scandalized. She glanced from one figure to the other. "My dear Sarah," she said, "Becky is a scullery maid. Scullery maids are not little girls." It really had not occurred to her to think of them in that light. Scullery maids were machines who carried coal scuttles and made fires. "But Becky is," said Sarah, "and I know she would enjoy herself. Please let her stay, because it is my birthday." Miss Minchin replied with much dignity. "As you ask, it is your birthday favor. She may stay. Rebecca, thank Miss Sarah for her great kindness." Becky had been backing into the corner, twisting the hem of her apron in delighted suspense. She came forward, bobbing courtesies. But between Sarah's eyes and her own there passed a gleam of friendly understanding, while her words tumbled over each other.